In the pre-dawn darkness of April 12, 1861, heavy artillery batteries surrounding Charleston Harbor opened fire. The targets of this bombardment were United States military installations, and the men firing the cannons were American citizens. The United States was a republic constructed entirely on the concept of democratic compromise. Yet within 85 years of its founding, its own people were systematically tearing it apart with artillery fire. To understand how the nation fractured to the point of inevitable civil war, we have to look at the economic baseline established decades earlier. By the early 19th century, the country operated on two distinct economic models. The industrializing North was transitioning entirely to free-wage labor. The agrarian South relied on the brutal exploitation of enslaved Africans to cultivate cash crops, predominantly cotton. These two economic systems required entirely different federal policies to survive. Because they were incompatible, every new inch of American territorial expansion threatened the delicate balance of national power in Washington. This map shows how Congress attempted to manage that threat. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was a federal law that drew a strict geographical line across the map at the 36-degree, 30-minute parallel. It admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, explicitly dividing the expanding Western territories to maintain an equal number of free and slave states in the Senate. That geographical balance was soon destabilized by federal economic policy. In 1828, Congress passed the Tariff of Abominations, a high tax on imported goods designed to protect northern factories from foreign competition. The South relied heavily on exporting cotton to Europe and buying manufactured goods in return, meaning this tariff effectively drained capital from the agrarian South to subsidize the industrial North. The political backlash was led by John C. Calhoun, a prominent politician from South Carolina. During the nullification crisis of 1832, Calhoun argued that states had the right to void federal laws they deemed unconstitutional, and South Carolina formally threatened to secede from the Union if the tariff was enforced. While the tariff sparked the crisis, Calhoun's private writings revealed a deeper anxiety. He viewed the tariff dispute as a proxy fight. His documented fear was that if the federal government possessed the power to force economic policies on a minority region, it would eventually use that same immense power to abolish the institution of slavery. Congress lowered the tariff and the nullification crisis subsided. The peace held, but Calhoun's legal arguments establishing states' rights and nullification created the exact constitutional blueprint the Southern states would use 3 decades later to justify breaking apart the Union. The final collapse of legislative compromise began in 1854 with Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas. Douglas wanted to facilitate the construction of a transcontinental railroad through the West, and to do so, he authored the Kansas-Nebraska Act to quickly organize the new territories. To secure Southern support for his railroad, Douglas included a provision that actively repealed the 1820 Missouri Compromise line. He replaced it with the doctrine of popular sovereignty, a policy allowing local settlers, rather than the federal government, to vote on whether slavery would be legal in their specific territory. The immediate consequence was chaos. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery zealots flooded into the Kansas territory to hijack the local vote. The political debate devolved into a localized guerrilla war, complete with ambushes and burning towns, earning the territory the name Bleeding Kansas. The fallout from this frontier violence fractured the national political landscape. The old Whig Party, unable to unify its northern and southern members, collapsed entirely. In its place, northern activists and former Whigs formed the Republican Party, an organization explicitly dedicated to halting the western expansion of slavery. Bleeding Kansas demonstrated that peaceful legislative compromise was dead. The national debate over slavery's expansion had crossed the threshold from congressional arguments to physical bloodshed. The Supreme Court accelerated this collapse in 1857. Dred Scott, an enslaved man, had sued for his freedom after being taken into free territory. The court ruled against him, declaring that Black people could not be American citizens, and, crucially, that the federal government had no constitutional authority to ban slavery in the Western territories. Northern politicians and activists reacted with outrage. They viewed the sweeping decision as proof that the federal government, including the Supreme Court, had been entirely captured by a slave power conspiracy intent on forcing slavery into every corner of the nation. In 1859, the paranoia in the South found its own violent justification. radical abolitionist John Brown breached the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His objective was to capture government weapons and incite a massive armed rebellion among the enslaved population. U.S. Marines captured Brown, and the state of Virginia executed him, but his raid terrified the Southern planter class. They were now convinced that the North was actively plotting to destroy their economy and society through violent armed insurrection. This mounting regional paranoia fractured the Democratic Party during the 1860 presidential election. Unable to agree on a platform regarding slavery in the territories, the Democrats split geographically, dividing their votes among a Northern candidate and a Southern candidate. This fractured opposition created a clear path to victory for the Republican nominee. Abraham Lincoln ran on a platform that promised to leave slavery alone where it already existed, but explicitly promised to halt its expansion into the Western territories. Lincoln secured the presidency by sweeping the heavily populated Northern states. He won the election without securing a single electoral vote from the Deep South. In fact, in 10 Southern states, he wasn't even on the ballot. This entirely regional victory was the breaking point. It signaled to the Southern states that the North's population had grown so large that the South had permanently lost the demographic and political leverage required to protect the institution of slavery within the federal system. South Carolina responded immediately. In December 1860, the state passed a legal ordinance to officially dissolve their union with the United States. Within months, 6 other states in the Deep South followed, triggering a rapid domino effect of secession. These states left a written record of their motives. In their official declarations of secession, states like South Carolina and Mississippi explicitly stated they were leaving the Union because of an increasing hostility from non-slaveholding states toward the institution of slavery. The political rupture culminated in a physical standoff. Outgoing President James Buchanan insisted secession was illegal, but refused to use force to stop it. When Lincoln took office, he refused to surrender federal property in the seceded states, eventually dispatching a supply ship to feed the starving United States garrison trapped at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. To the newly formed Confederacy, resupplying the fort was an act of war. On April 12, 1861, Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard ordered the bombardment of Major Robert Anderson's federal troops at Fort Sumter. The timeline leaves a clear record. The Southern states chose secession because they refused to exist in a nation where the institution of slavery could no longer expand. And the North chose war because they refused to let the Union be destroyed.